Well, welcome everyone once again to my channel. Today we have Pete Hodge with us. And Pete, or Peter Hodge, he was originally known, and David Eves and Jim North were the trio who made up Dulcimer, a late 60s acoustic folk rock band. The sole surviving member, Mr. Hodge, is with us today. The band wrote all of their songs and specialized in evocative melodies with introspective lyrics. Oftentimes, the subject matter would be mystical, magical, and fantasy. And the trio were multi-instrumentalists who would switch from guitar to mandolin to dulcimer to glockenspiel, even coconuts, back to guitar, bass. Well, you get the idea. Dulcimer initially only saw the release of one album, but continued fan interest would lead to a second release years later. And in the 90s, there was a reformation of the band, with Pete and David recording a trio of new albums. The duo continued working together in music projects up until David's passing in 2011. Since then, Pete has focused on his other passion, landscape painting, tutoring, but still keeping the music alive. Well, welcome, Pete.
Hi there, Greg. Yeah, I don't really need to say anything much now. I think you pretty well covered it all, so we might as well finish there, I think.
Okay. Interview is over. That's the
That's it. Yeah, that's the way I like it. It's good. No, it's nice to meet you finally, albeit over the ether.
Yes. Well, yeah, nice to meet you and be able to see you face to face and converse with you properly, right? Okay. So let's go back to the beginning, brush off some of those cobwebs if you can.
Yes.
Where were you born?
Of those.
A few of those. Where were you born, and what are some fond memories of your childhood?
Yeah, well, to many people, it would have probably been considered an idyllic childhood. I lived up in a little village in the Cotswolds called Snows Hill. And very true to its name, we had a lot of snow, some very bad winters up there. Often we were trapped up there for weeks on end, couldn't go to school, which was devastating, of course. So we, yes, it was very much that rural upbringing, really, finding pleasures in nature and sort of far away from the metropolis. Yeah, so a very pleasant start to life, really. Could be a little bit lonely up there. There weren't many other kids of my age about. So yes, probably a little bit on the solitary side as well, but overall, pretty good upbringing. Yeah, and my parents were very down-to-earth country people. My dad worked on the land all his life. In fact, in later years, I wrote a little song about him called Indiana Jones, just about his, again, rather solitary life up on top of the hills. He built stone walls and fed cattle in the winter and picked sprouts, you know, very hard, rustic life. But it was his life. And in later years, he became a gardener. I never inherited any of that from him, hard work or any of those sort of things, but he was a good guy, yeah.
Well, were either of your parents musically inclined?
No, not at all. I had a grandmother I spent some time with who considered herself a musician. She had a rasping old harmonium. She pumped like mad and came up with all these tunes, and she'd look at me and say, "You know what that is, don't you?" And I wouldn't have the faintest idea. It all sounded very much the same and just a mixture of notes. So in answer to your question, no, there was no music in the family really at all. And it was very late coming to me, probably 16 or 17, before I, for whatever reason, I bought a guitar. I don't know quite how it happened. Perhaps I've been listening to some music and thinking this is possible. So yeah, about 17, I started playing music for the first time, really. And that was just the usual self-taught thing. I got a little book of chords, and there is a certain magic the first time those few chords, one leads to another, and you start to see melodies within them. So yeah, it's like a fledgling learning to fly for the first time. Oh, all this stuff is out there, and even I can learn it, because I don't think I had a natural gift for it, but it's something I really wanted to do.
Well, we're glad you did.
Well, I'm glad I did too. It would have been a pretty boring life otherwise, probably. I would have still been picking sprouts up on the Cotswold Hills otherwise.
Well, how about siblings? Did you have any brothers, sisters?
Yeah, I had my sister, elder sister. She, again, not musical. We had a lot of interest in animals. We had a lot of wildlife in the family. We had, pet birds and hedgehogs, or rabbits, all sorts. My sister particularly it's almost like an animal hospital. People bought her things if, the animals were injured. So we had a mutual love of that, looking after animals and interest in animals.
Well, do you think that that kind of rustic, solitary lifestyle lent its way perhaps to writing music, or it gave you some ideas, I guess?
Very perceptive. Yes, I guess it did really. You obviously don't realize any of this at the time. And certainly when we did our first album, a lot of it was very much based on our rural backgrounds. Although Dave Eves, the chap I initially formed the band with, he was from Coventry, a major city, and he moved into our little village. He had lodgings there. And I actually noticed one day that he had a guitar strapped to his back. Wherever he went, there was a guitar strapped to his back. So as you do, we got talking out of mutual interest, and fairly soon we started strumming along together. It always seems to just happen like that. People come into your lives at certain times. He was somewhat more advanced than I was. He'd been around the folk clubs in his city of Coventry, so he knew a little bit more of the ropes, and he was already quite an accomplished musician. I was learning myself, learning off him as well. So I kind of accepted the fact that he was at that stage a good musician, and he also had a very special voice. Again, I wasn't blessed with a great voice, and if people now sometimes say, oh, I didn't know you sang, and I said, well, I don't actually, but it's never stopped me. And this is what I think people like, say, Dylan and Leonard Cohen, people of this ilk, opened up for the man on the street. You didn't have to be a wonderful singer to be able to put across your own music or write your own songs.
Right.
So when Dave came together, it was just a natural melding of two disparate forces. And even when we started playing, we did initially cover versions. We used to play in little restaurants and bars and folk clubs, things of that nature. But eventually it just sort of progressed a little bit, and we were almost writing songs from the word go. We never even thought about it really. It just seemed a very natural thing to do. It was never a question of let's write a song. It just happened. So we were very fortunate in that way. And I think at certain times in your life as well, you're much more open to other people's ideas and cross-fertilizations. I think maybe as we get older, we get a little bit more cantankerous and not quite so accepting of other people's ideas. So that's what happened with Dave and I met up. And I guess you'd probably want me to talk about the first album, how that came about. Unless there's anything else that sort of come to mind in the meantime.
You two didn't do any busking, by the way, did you?
Once.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, once. That was
what
enough.
What kind of experience was that?
It was interesting. You had to, and it was acoustic, so you had to be twice as loud as usual. So the voice didn't go very well. Although some of the places we played in, it was a little bit like busking anyway. I mean, if you play to in a restaurant to 30 or 40 people who are more interested in their food, what they've got on their plates. Yeah, you kind of got, it was very similar to busking, really. You know, you knew a lot of people weren't actually listening, you were background music.
Right.
But
Yeah,
having said all, yeah.
Well, I was going to say, yes. Can you turn it down a little bit? I'm trying to eat. Right. Right.
Yeah. Right. Sorry, I thought you meant you.
No,
Okay.
no. Like,
You don't
like when
want
you're
me
playing.
trying to adjust any of these controls on here, believe me.
No. Like when you guys were playing, like in the restaurant.
Yeah, but it was part of the job. But
Yeah.
ironically, from that, playing a little restaurant up in the Cotswolds, that's where our, as they say, big break came. We were playing up there very late one night. We'd done about 3.5, 4 hours of solid playing. Dave his voice was going. He said, I've had enough, I'm packing in now. And I was going, no, come on, we'll do another couple of songs, just end of the evening. No, I'm going now. So Dave leaves the room, goes into the adjacent bar, comes dashing back a few minutes later, and he says, Richard Todd is in the other bar. I knew of Richard Todd. In his day, he was, what would you call him? Probably the English Kevin Costner. You know, he was quite a big star of his day. So Dave came in and said, he wants us to play for him. And in a rather belligerent, sulky mood, I said, no way. I said, you said you're finishing, we're finishing now. I don't care who's in there. We're going now. As usually happened, Dave talked me round and we went in and we played a few of the songs for him. And he was particularly interested because we were playing original songs, not all of them, but he liked our original songs. And he sort of had an idea. He just wondered whether we might be interested in collaborating with him to a degree on, would we like to do some music whereby he could speak poetry over the top of it. I think there's a little bit of a trend for it going on at that time. I think, can't remember whether it's before or after War of the Worlds came out with, I think, Richard Burton speaking on it. So maybe the genesis of the idea was that from that we were going to do something of that nature. So we went about and thought about it a little bit, went to see him at his home up in the Cotswold village at the time, had a bit of a talk about it. And then we never really saw him till we went into the studio to record it. And in the meantime, because he'd got us a record deal with a chap called Larry Page, who at the time had do you remember the Trogs? Yes. Or the Kinks? Kinks, yeah. Well, he was very instrumental in their careers at the time. So it seemed rather strange. Some country bumpkins like us sort of were on the same sort of bill as these sort of people. But he was launching a singer-songwriters label, the Panther. So about a couple of months later, we ended up in the studio. We went in there a little bit overawed by everything that was in there. It's quite a big studio, Lansdowne studio. And we sort of sat down and started. He said, would you just like to run through a few songs, lads, as he called us, and just to get the sound balance. So we did this. We played 2 or 3 songs. He said, okay, fine, that's a wrap, which I presume was language for, we've actually recorded that. He said, come and have a listen. And the first song we ever did was a song called Lisa's Song, which was about an American girlfriend of Dave's.
That's my favorite on that album.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that was the first one. And he said, come and have a listen to this. We recorded. So we were just doing a sound check. We thought, no, that's it. He said, so we came in. It's probably the first time we'd heard ourselves. No, we once heard ourselves on a little cassette machine, which was then very, very new. So we had heard ourselves once and it was so. But he played this back and we were quite surprised actually. We thought, okay, this is easy, you know. So we recorded the whole album in one sitting. I think we were there for about 6-7 hours. And I think we recorded 12 songs, 2 of them which probably didn't make the album. Don't quite know what happened to those. But we just sat down and played. And certainly Caravan, which is one of the longest tracks and featured Richard Todd reading some poetry we'd written. That was all done in one take, and that involved swapping instruments and well, it's amazing. It's about 7.5 minutes long. And I just remember the total relief when we got to the end of it, because we thought, there's no way we could do that again.
Right.
And Dave was literally just nodding, Richard Todd, this is when you come in. We hadn't even heard him do it before that, read the poetry. And also Sonnet on the Fall, the other one that he featured on, exactly the same.
Right.
And he was, of course, the consummate professional. He just nailed it.
Right.
First time. So at the end of that, Larry said, "That's it, lads. That's the wrap. We're on our way."
Wow. Well,
as they say.
Talk a little bit about that, switching out instruments and how you coordinated all that without any overdubs and
yeah,
recording.
Well, occasionally now, I think it's actually quite good fun doing that. And we, again, when we're playing live, we're doing the same thing. So I think on, say, the Caravan, which is the long track, I think Jem played bass and glockenspiel. Dave held it all together, although he plays many instruments. He held it all together. He played the 12-string throughout. And I went between, I think, mandolin, guitar, harmonica, and we're both doing the vocals as well. And as with any live recording, if you listen hard enough, you can probably hear the changes over and the waiting for somebody else to come in and get set up to play the next little piece. But it was, yes, it was really living on the edge, playing on the edge, if you like. And I said, considering we'd only been playing about a year together, it was just amazing how it worked. And the other thing is we had very, I won't say primitive, but very cheap instruments. I played a little mandolin, which a few weeks previously I'd run over in a car park.
I was going to ask you about that, yeah.
And Dave actually was a good cabinet maker. He managed to glue it back together and got it playing again. Didn't hold its tuning very well, but it was playable. We had two of the cheapest guitars on the market. I think they're called Echo or Eco, and Echo, I think they were called. And Jem's bass was put through, when we were playing, it was put through an ordinary guitar amp. And initially he started out with a classical guitar. We just tuned it down a tone to give the idea of a bass. But in the studio, he used his bass and they put it through their system. And he was a very good bass player. Very, again, like myself, he was self-taught, so he didn't have any musical background, but he just seemed to feel what we were doing. So he slotted in very well to that. So yeah, so we came away not quite believing what was happening, thinking, oh, this is easy. So that's, and then probably within about a month, I think it was released. Mm-hmm. And then if I'm talking too much or you've got a question, do stop me, because
yeah, I did.
This is raiding the memory bank here.
I know. I had a couple. I wanted to go back a little bit on your drive up to the studio. Okay, where you talked about running over the mandolin. You went in an A35 van. What is an A35 van?
Well, no, it would be called an antique, if there are any about. It was a very, very small van, green as I remember, with a very narrow wheelbase. So almost when we went round corners, you almost leaned with the car to get round it. So we got three of us, and it's a very small, we had three of us crammed in as best we could. And then the instruments were literally piled up all around us, and we could just about get everything in, amps and the guitars and all the other paraphernalia. So it wasn't a comfortable journey up. And in fact, we drove back the same night. So we did probably 8 hours down in London and then drove both ways up there and back again. So it was a very long day. But yes, we came back thinking, well, yeah, we've done all right there. Mm-hmm. And in retrospect, I think the fact that we were very naive, I think at the time, we didn't really know what was happening. We had very ordinary instruments. It gave the music a very sort of, and also we were hanging on by our fingernails to do a lot of these songs. We'd only just written them, so we didn't really know them that well. But I think that sort of on the edge fragility gave the album that little bit of, some people say it's a slightly magical album. It's very true to the subject matter. It's yeah, but then again, that's for other people to decide.
Well,
We try not to do, well, I try not to do pride. Pride doesn't really mean anything, but I think I could say, looking back, I'm very proud of what we did at that time in our lives. You know, it's something that nobody can take away from you. And that's the great thing about recording in general. A live performance is gone forever.
right.
Something you record is, as has happened with the LPs and the albums ever since, they've suddenly appeared on the internet and lots of releases we knew nothing about. In fact, our second album was so good, it didn't actually come out for another 20 years. No, yeah, about another 20 years. And that was, I presume, a pirated copy. So we hadn't actually heard our second album at all since
Really?
the day we did it until about 1990, I think.
Wow.
Which is on to the next strand of the story when, but no, there's other bit.
That's the album that I was first introduced to you, Room for Thought. But
Well, that's amazing. But I haven't even got a copy of that myself, I don't think.
Really?
Oh, no, I did find a CD somewhere with it on. That's it, yeah. No, and I never followed it up because I don't know what.
Well, the recording, I think Larry Page had a great angle on doing it live, you know, in one take, because
he was very clever. Again, you don't appreciate it at the time, but if, say, for the first take, if he told us when the red light goes on, you're recording, we would have probably seized up and got panic stricken.
That's what I was going to say.
So
right.
he handled us very well. And of course, because we're in the studio, Dave saw a piano and there's an organ, Hammond organ in there. And what could we perhaps try a bit? But Larry said, no, this is what the album is. And he was absolutely right, because now any sound can be replicated in the studio almost instantly.
Mm.
And often that's what it sounds like. It's just very mechanical. And so the fact that it was very much live and we were live too, it gave it a certain distinct quality, shall we say. And I think at the time, people were a little bit more receptive to that. Mostly, you could call it folk rock. Occasionally we got a little bit more rocky, but it's mostly fairly gentle music. And it was the time for the singer-songwriters, the James Taylors, the Carole Kings, people like that. So we did have a little bit of, we came possibly at the right time for us. It didn't sort of translate into vast stardom or anything of that nature, but it was on the edge of it, shall we say.
Well, I know David does had a great voice, but you harmonize real well with him though on a few of the tracks.
Yeah, I think so. And ironically, I used to sing very often high harmonies, and Dave had quite a high voice anyway. I don't think I'd try that now.
Well,
I do occasionally when I'm in here, and we usually decide, no, that's not really working. Get somebody who can sing high nowadays. So.
Right.
I've gone down more. I'm slightly more in the Leonard Cohen, Tom Waits sort of area now.
Right. I can hear that. Well, let's talk about a few of the tracks that I enjoyed. The opening, Sonnet to the Fall. Of course, that's the first time with Richard, and
yeah.
He reminds me of some other British actor, his voice.
I think possibly Richard, Richard Burton, possibly.
Maybe it is.
Does that strike a chord?
Very, he came across real well on that, and a very, solid speaking voice.
Yeah, he was a lovely person too, very English, old school.
Yeah.
I don't. The film that he was famous for in a little bit before us was The Dam Busters. I think he was nominated, got various awards and so forth for that. So in his day, as I said, he was a very big actor. And again, unfortunately, he died quite a few years back now. But we were very lucky to have had, and he was also joint managing us with Larry Page at the time. So he was a little bit of a go-between, he could see how sort of gauche and naive we were. And he was that, and also, we hadn't long left our homes and so forth. He even came to meet our parents one, just, and they're obviously absolutely delighted to see this sort of superstar coming
Right.
to. In fact, we used to live in an old, sorry, things come into your mind suddenly. We used to, we went all rock star. We lived in this old dilapidated cottage in the middle of a sort of sprout field, I think it was. You went down a long drive to it. It was half of it was condemned and the other half was freezing. The whole place was freezing, and we even had to have band discussions whether we could actually afford to heat it during the winter. We bought it. We had a meeting to discuss whether we could buy a load of logs to put in the fire at one stage. Money was short, but it was, I think you'd call it a very good time anyway.
Yeah. See, that's what I enjoy.
So, sorry, what I was started to say was, and then one day Richard Todd came to see us at the old farmhouse, and Dave and I were both married then, and we brought our wives along to the old farmhouse, and they're all looking out the window. Richard Todd's coming down. We can see him coming, and they were absolutely delighted to meet him. And of course, he made them feel very relaxed. And so I think we had afternoon tea, as we do in England. Afternoon tea.
Yes.
Very civilized.
Did they ask for his autograph?
I'm pretty well certain, yes.
Yeah. Well, see, that's what I enjoy. I was going to say about doing these interviews is the anecdotes, the little side stories. It's not all about just hearing this happened and this happened, and then in our career this is. I like to hear little side stories too.
Well, yeah. There's. Sure, they pop into your head without you realizing sometimes, and then you sometimes find you've repeated something a few times, but you sometimes just have to. They come into your head, and you have to remember them and put them out there. And I think one of the strange things that happened with the launch of the album, we actually played at Ronnie Scott's, which was a big muso place in London. And we played to the press, basically. So I can remember nothing about it apart from being absolutely terrified. And likewise, within a couple of months, we were jetted off to do television in Europe. I think we played in Amsterdam and somewhere, Vienna. We did 2 television shows over there. The irony being that we were living in this old deathly farmhouse which was falling down. We were pretty well broke. I was trying to start my art career going at the time, doing little jobs here and there. Jem was working on the land. He was doing menials like picking up potatoes and so forth. And Dave was doing various things, including starting to build musical instruments. He became a luthier, taught himself that. So we were trying to scrape a living doing this. Even when the album came out, you often hear this from bands, they're poor all the time. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we were jetted off to first class to do these television things abroad and with a personal minder and taking round to meet people.
Let me ask you, why Holland and Austria? Why was there an interest over there? Were you popular in those countries?
I have no idea. We just went along with the management. They'd arranged it, so we went along. Yes, we had the album was released over there, and in fact, it was almost worldwide. It was Australia and Far East. In fact, probably Japan is where we had our only hit. Mm-hmm. Allegedly, we never heard much about it, but we did have a small hit over there, and for a few years, a little bit of royalty came in from abroad, but never really financially did we have a good time of it. It was always a little bit difficult. But just going back to the early thing about the farmhouse, that's when we, I said we went off to Holland and we played in these 2 shows. Again, I think we were slightly misled. They told us we were on at a certain time in the studio, and our minder took us off around Amsterdam just to show us the sights and so forth. We kept looking at our watches. Aren't we meant to be on? Oh, you'll be all right. She said, well, we're meant to be on in half an hour. Don't you think? No, I'll show you this first. So we get back in the studio ready to do our 2 arranged songs to do. And they said, are you doing anything on the Dulcimer? the instrument, that is. And then we said, no, that wasn't part of the plan. Well, do you think you could? And we hadn't practiced anything. The two songs we used them on were a little bit, well, almost impossible to do live. So we put together something we've been working on and actually played that on there. So again, it was absolute skin of the teeth. You know, we got through it. I'd never seen any footage of that, but we got through it. So I think we did okay, actually. But that evening, they took us out to a rather trendy nightclub, very big place. Seemed to be the elite of the town seemed to be gathered there. And at one stage during the evening, we're having this meal, and all the lights went down, and then a spotlight came on and started hovering around. And it came to our table, and the guys with us said, "Stand up, stand up." Said, "Why? Why? What's happened? What's happened?" He said, "It's you. They just announced that you're here, and you've got to stand." And we were just so, you know, we cowered. We sort of and sort of acknowledged our audience and sat down. And so, as I said, it was just that little hint of that's what stardom would have been like. We just saw a little bit of it, just enough to, in my case, realize it probably wouldn't have suited me very well. Dave would have probably responded quite well to that, and Jem would have loved every moment of it. Jem was a real Jack the lad. He was up for everything. Sort of thing.
He would have just ate it up.
Yeah, and then we flew back again, first class, get back in. Next morning, Jem was up at 6 o'clock picking up potatoes in the freezing cold, middle of winter, frost cover. Yeah, not in the middle of winter, but it was cold outside, shall we say. So I think we'd call that a fonder memory. But as with all these things, it just seemed to be happening so quickly, and we just, oh, this is what happens, you know, and we thought that's how it's going to be from now on. And then there was talk of an American tour and a Japanese tour. All these, Larry was getting ready for when's the next album ready and all these things. And then with the second album, for whatever reason, it didn't come out until, as you mentioned, the one that you came across so many years later, and we only got to hear ourselves all those years later.
Well, I had a couple of questions.
Yes, please tell us.
No, that's fine. But the album, the first album, received some good critical reviews, I guess from the public as well. What did you think about Melody Maker comparing the music to Simon and Garfunkel?
Well, obviously very flattered at the time. Obviously, they're enormous at the time. And I think I'd have to say they had been a little bit of an influence on us. I think although we were very English-based, most of our influences tended to be American or North American, up towards Canada. You know, Joni Mitchell, Dylan started out up there, Neil Young, Leonard Cohen. These sort of people were the people who influenced us more, particularly lyrically. Right. You know, you can actually put a lot of lyrics into a song. Whereas my wife often says, you do write a lot of words, don't you? I think that's called damning with faint praise, you know, but it's, yeah. So we always had the love for words and the spoken words. And even later on, when we did some more albums, we put a few little bits of narrative spoken word into some of the songs then as well.
We'll talk about some of the British folk bands that may have influenced you or were popular at the time. What about like Fairport Convention?
Yeah, well, I loved Fairport Convention very much, particularly in that incarnation, their very early stages with Sandy Denny. I loved that. I think they were, no, I was going to say slightly more trad. No, they weren't. They were the first people to expand folk music into folk rock, if you like. So they were, yeah. And Richard Thompson, to this day, is still one of my favorite songwriters, a very, very great songwriter, I think, and performer as well. But I wouldn't say weren't quite the influence, because to us, they were very much more advanced than us, you know, they were electric and they were a big band. So we didn't really think too much about. They did a lot of
cover material too. I mean, they're great songwriters. they did cover, especially Dylan.
Yes, they did, certainly in those days. Yeah, indeed they did.
You were playing some live gigs at this point, right, to support the album?
Yes, yeah, we.
Do you recall
I think,
any memorable gigs?
well, again, the nearest we got to true being
Mhm.
in the right place at the right time, we played at a club in Beckenham, which the previous week, a young lad called Davy Jones had been playing there, who shortly after that became David Bowie. So whatever happened to him, who knows? But anyway, we were a week. Yes, I think it's the story of our lives. We were a week late there. We could have said we played. We were with David Bowie and we played with David Bowie, but we did a biggish thing down a place called Western Supermare with it's a band called Curved Air at the time. Who were quite big at that time, and I think we played that on a borrowed PA system, and that was one of the bigger crowds. But we tended to do more the little, as they were in those days, folk clubs. They seem to be the easiest places for us to play. But basically anywhere would have us. Larry got us a few better gigs here and there, but I think even then, singer-songwriters, unless you're well established to start with, how that happens, I don't know. It's very difficult to get gigs, even more so now, because people mostly want cover bands. People want to go out and hear songs they know. Right. They don't want to be introduced to these rather self-righteous people who write all their own songs and we give us something we know. And I totally understand that. If I go to see somebody, you'd be pretty disappointed if they didn't do at least some of their better known songs, oh, here's our new album. Yes, but I don't know any of this. So I understand that totally, but it's also the difficulty that singer-songwriters face. And I guess now with the internet, you can put yourself up there, you can have a platform slightly more easily, even if you're not performing. Right. But I think we always felt that you always had to break down barriers. And of course, in those days, folk clubs tended to be very traditional based. Jem used to take, even if we were playing acoustically, Jem used to take his little electric bass in there. And I remember one notable occasion, we went to a very traditional finger in your ear type folk club in Cheltenham, where they sang, "Now as I walk." They sang that sort of style. And when we walked in with the electric bass, you could just see them look, oh, what have we got here, sort of thing. And it was, it was a bit of a barrier to break down, shall we say. We didn't feel we quite fitted in there. Then later on, as we did more clubs, did a couple of university type things and art center type things, we found also we needed to, because most of our songs were fairly low key, gentle, a couple of little folk rocky ones in there. We found we'd sometimes had to put in a cover version here and there just to appease the crowd, really. And we also decided at one stage we needed to lighten up a little bit. So we wrote a couple of funny songs in inverted commas. And Jem was particularly, Jem sort of set a lot of this up. So we need to do some. And I remember at one stage, I don't know the reason for this, but in the middle of a song we just played, he was standing on a chair with a one-stringed fiddle. That's an interesting instrument, just fiddling away, smoking an old-fashioned pipe, sort of smoke going everywhere. Really? And at the same time, he decided it'd be quite interesting to float balloons filled with flour out over the audience. Now, people quite like to burst balloons. So we had this audience, covered in flour, basically. We weren't invited back to that one. Okay. Jem was a bit of a wild child. He never quite knew what he'd be coming up with next, but was a laugh a minute. You know, he was
Okay.
willing
When-
to do anything really.
when you said flower at first, I thought you meant the flowers, you know, that grow.
San Francisco, if you come to
Right,
San
like-
Francisco,
right,
yeah.
right. But then
No, this
flower-
was the old
yeah,
baker's
white,
flower, yeah.
right, that kind of flower, yeah.
I
So
think the other flowers would have gone down all right, but the baker's
Yeah,
flower
right.
is.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny though. So
Yeah, I think it was at the time. I can't remember that. It was just almost shocked. You think, what's he doing? He didn't tell us about it before. It was almost one of those Spinal Tap moments.
right, right.
Yeah.
So obviously they didn't invite you back after that.
No, no. I think it was in Wales somewhere. So we weren't invited there very often anyway. So
So no big loss. Well,
Mm.
is that why Jim left the band? You guys weren't radical enough? You weren't
no, I think basically we ran out of money really. You know, I was doing a little bit of artwork, as I said. Dave was repairing instruments and doing bits of woodwork. We had a little bit of income coming in. Jem basically had nothing, so he eventually quit. I think he joined a punkish band for a time.
Really?
But he went off driving lorries and left it all be. It disappeared for a few years. But however, we did get together before his rather untimely death, about 4 years ago, I think. And we did have one small reunion. So that was good.
Well, that's nice. I mean, I was not able to find any date for him of his passing. You know,
And I'm the last person. Bit
Yeah.
like technology, don't ask me about dates either for anything.
I did find David's, of course, but
Yeah.
what are your thoughts? Why Room for Thought was not released? Why do you think it was not released at the time?
I don't know. We had a feeling it was okay, and I think maybe it didn't have that the gentle quality of the film. I think they probably wanted a replica of the first album, you know, a little bit lighter. I think I was thinking I was trying to make things a little bit simpler. We did mostly guitar-led songs on the second one, so there was a lot of quite heavy strumming on it. There were a few, I think Dave in particular wrote 2 or 3 very good songs. And in fact, I think there's some very good songs on there. In fact, many years later, Larry did sort of get in touch and talked about the possibility of going back in and perhaps reworking it a little bit. I still think it has an immediacy about it. I think it's fairly valid. I think we were, I think it was okay, but it could have been better, and it didn't quite have the feel of the first one. I think we'd got better guitars, as in more expensive guitars, not much, but they'd gone up a grade, and they didn't have quite that same, as I said, fragile, gentle resonance that the other ones had.
Except for But Maybe Not. That's my favorite on that album. But
thank you. Oh, that's good. That was one of mine. So thank you. Hey. Yes, that was a slightly whimsical.
That's similar to the first album.
Yes, that was a lighter one, wasn't it? And in fact, many years I did actually re-record that many years later with actually I did a lot of overdubs on it and orchestral things and so forth on it, and it probably didn't improve much on the original, but I always quite liked that song, and it did have that very childlike quality about it, really. Naive.
Yeah, innocent. Yeah.
Innocence, that's the word.
Yeah. Yes, and Mr. Time is also another one that I like.
Yeah, and that could have been quite a little poppy one. That skipped along quite nicely. Yeah, we did that occasionally when we were performing. But we didn't really, I think the main problem was we didn't really get out there enough promoting it. It was hard to find good gigs. Yeah, you could do little folk clubs and so forth. But we couldn't really find enough venues to sustain a lifestyle, i.e. to be able to eat. We could breathe still, but eating, was a little bit more, we needed money for that. So those sort of things came into it. Possibly, I don't know what happened with the Penta label that Larry launched. I don't think it was a massive success, but again, I don't really know. But maybe, you know, money ran out a little bit. Yeah.
Wow.
And as I said, the first we knew was about 20 years later when somebody from abroad got in touch with me and informed me, did you know your second LP's been released on the internet?
Mm-hmm.
So in that in turn, sorry, was there another question before that?
The interest, where do you think the continued interest in your music came from? Was it like people rediscovering your music, or new fans, or what prompted that release of Room for Thought? You know, it had to come more.
Again, it's a total mystery to me. I don't know. As I said, I've never even had a copy of it, not the vinyl copy anyway. I think I did get a CD of it. I've absolutely no idea on that. But the thing was, it did actually spur us into action again, because we brought a friend of mine, my wife's cousin, Rob Savage, had a little studio at the time, and he sort of adopted us. We used to go over there, do a few recordings. So initially I went because Dave and I weren't doing much together at that stage. So I went and did a little solo album with him, and not far from here, about 40 miles down the road. I used to go over there most weekends, and we'd spend sessions doing that. But that's when we discovered that the other one had been released, the second album. Mm-hmm. And Rob sort of tracked this album down and got in touch with, I think he got in touch with a London record company called President Records, and showed them the LP and so forth. And they were very interested, were we doing anything now? And in fact, we got another 3 CD, 3 album deal with President Records. That was, I think, probably the early 1990s. Mm-hmm. Previously, we'd also done another, shall we say, concept? Can we still use that word? Concept album with a local author, a chap called Fred Archer, which is got
a land fit for heroes.
I'll show you this now. This was Fred. So it's more him. He was doing sort of narrative and so forth for it.
Yeah.
And we
raise it up just a little bit. There we go. Now we got the whole album.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we did that one with him. And once again, the timing was all wrong. We just about finished it. He suddenly moved away from the area when we could have been out promoting it. And again, the album didn't appear till about 10 years after we recorded it.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly came out. And we did that in a little studio in Worcester. So the guy there released Muff Murphy, and he released this eventually. And
so Fred Archer was a veteran of both World Wars. Is that right?
Well, I think the first one was more from his parents' sort of perspective, but he was quite a well-known author, certainly locally and nationwide. He sold a lot of books, and he was very, very rustic. And I remember the music didn't take long. We wrote the songs for it and linked it together, and we sort of said to Fred, can you write something to fill the gaps here, to link this section to this? It might be about evacuees or broken soldiers coming home from the war. Could you link these things together? Could you write something for it? So he came back and he'd written a lot of narrative to it. Not poetry, it was more blank verse, it's more narrative. Mm-hmm. And we assumed, because he did a lot of public speaking, that he'd be a brilliant deliverer of his lines. But in fact, what we found, it was very staccato to start with. So we ended up just saying, can you just talk off the top of your head, Fred, and just tell us about, and then he just launched into his very rustic sort of reminiscences and just became very, very natural. The only trouble is there was so much editing to do at the end of that. That took much longer than we'd spent on the music, really. but it was still it was a fun experience and something a little bit different for us. And also where our roots were, we love this narrative idea of telling stories, basically, which is still what I feel. I like telling stories. But as I said, unfortunately, Fred also died a few years later, and this was after he'd moved away from the area. So that never launched. So it's sort of, it appears occasionally on the internet, copies for sale and so forth, but that never took off until, so the next one was the 90s with the President records, and they, again, a few good reviews for the records, but not great sales. And eventually I think things ground to a halt a little bit. With David also moved away, so it wasn't so easy we're raising families and doing all the things you do that take up the rest of your time. So they became more important. And I was trying to create an opening for my art, getting into my artwork more, making a living out of that, really. So the art became a day job, and the music was something that I just kept doing if and when I've got the time to do it and the inclination. But I've always kept writing songs, and Dave the same. When we did get together, we'd do a few songs, usually write something and chew the fat, as they say.
Mm-hmm. Well, you you mentioned a couple of times about timing and how important that is.
Yeah.
And in most things in life, most careers and whatnot, it's very important, but especially I think as a musician, if you're like you said, a week late, if you're a day late, sometimes, I mean, it can just alter your whole career. And timing and being at the right place at the right time and having the right friends and
That's very pertinent. That's made me think of something else there. Another thing that timing just a little bit out. We had one of our tracks was included on a compilation LP by people like Vangelis, John Anderson, people of that ilk on it, and it was, I think, on Warner Brothers, I believe it came out. I do actually have a copy of it. So I haven't seen it for years. But for whatever reason, the week that it was going to have a big launch, and Larry was saying, this is going to really put us on the map. This is going to make a big difference. Sorry, it was another record company at the time. It was President Records. So they were all enthusiastic, and we're thinking, great, this could be the thing to get us through. Probably one track on there would make more than we'd ever, or give us more exposure than we'd had in the rest of our careers, basically. And for some, it did come out, but there's some great disaster or something went on at the time, and I can't remember what it was, but it never really came to light. So again, just a few days. I cannot remember what actually happened. It might have been during the hijacking season or whatever, but something happened. Or it might have been a major strike or something. Anyway, we never benefited from that in any way at all.
I visited.
Do you see a pattern emerging here?
Yes. Would you say you guys were befilled with a lot of bad luck?
No, you make your own luck, don't you? It's like everything. You have to be so persistent. You can't afford to let your head drop. You have to keep going. Right. I think it was probably more finances, family lives, those things that eventually sort of slowed things down, shall we say. No, you've got to be very, very resolute and focused at all times to be a success. So anybody, doesn't matter what sort of music they make, whether I love it or hate it, good for them. They've stuck with it and they've made it. So, albeit for 15 minutes, we had 14 and a half minutes. Some people have 15 minutes of fame. We had just under. So we were happy with that to a degree, but it would have been nice if the music had been a little bit more widely known.
Right. Well, it's extremely difficult to balance everything. Yeah. Your home life and the music and everything else. So I get that. Yeah.
Well, I have quite a few discussions with friends of mine about, the sort of, if you like, the integrity of music and so forth. And I think we've both come to the conclusion that in the long term, if one person out there likes what you're doing, remembers it, or it resonates with that person, that's enough. Of course, it isn't really. You'd like 2 or 3 people to really like it, but we always say that if one person likes it, and unfortunately, there have been people throughout my life who have, you know, got back to me. I've had some people in Peru and Australia and on the continent getting in touch who still remember with fondness what we did then. So, yeah, it's something that cannot be taken away. And this is the thing about recording in general. As I said, it's there for perpetuity. It's always going to be or perpetuity even.
Talk about, getting back to the interview, Mike Hooper, bringing Mike Hooper into the fold. When did that happen?
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, this was at the time when we had been, in inverted commas again, rediscovered, and we got the 3-album deal. So we started thinking about we need to play live a little bit more and for the recording purposes as well. So Dave spotted Mike in I think he was playing in a pub somewhere, and sort of said, yeah, he's good. And he was playing the bass at the time, but he was also a multi-instrumentalist. So we asked him if he'll come into the fold, and he very graciously said yes, he would. So he helped us on the albums, played quite a bit on that, and also live performances. So we became a trio at one stage, and we also brought in a girl singer called Andrea Blythe, who was very, very good, very quick learning harmonies and so forth. So at one stage we did a couple of radio things where we actually, 4 of us went together and played as a band sort of live in the studio. But all good things come to an end, and the albums didn't do that well. So after the resurgence, I also got into a slight, well, there was a possibility of litigation. I actually inadvertently gave a chap in South Korea, the go-ahead to relaunch, I think, the first album in South Korea and worldwide. And I didn't know, I thought it was our stuff, and I shouldn't have done that, evidently. So by the end of the century, I got rather disillusioned with music, full stop, really. It was, you think, if all this comes out of something you enjoy doing, is it worth it? So I almost sort of gave up the guitars and that at that stage, almost sold off a few things. But I, despite that, I still kept writing songs and that for a few years.
Right. I think if, and I know it's impossible to do, if you just keep the business side out of the music, I think everybody would enjoy it a lot more, especially musicians, you know.
But whenever I see a documentary on television, a rock documentary or whatever it is, music documentary, it always seems to come down to management and squabbles, and usually over who owns what, and, you know, artists being refused the rights to play their own songs and this type of thing going on.
Right.
So from that point of view, thought, yes, that's probably it for the time being. It wasn't, but at the time that seemed to be. Yes, I got a little bit worn down by it all, and said Dave wasn't around anymore, and he was very often the driving force with, oh, another thing, we wrote a little, yeah, Dave was always coming up with weird ideas. Why don't we write a musical? Yeah, good idea, Dave. Yeah, musical. Yeah, Dave. I know what it's going to be about, he said. The Life of Anne Frank. So I immediately pointed out there was a slight problem with that scenario, in so much as Anne Frank was hiding from the Nazis in an attic, being as quiet as possible with her family, not to be discovered, and suddenly bursting into song in the midst of their hiding would not have been a good idea. You know, it's a little bit, But as normally happened with these things, Dave normally had the ability to talk me around to things. So we actually wrote a musical, and we actually recorded it and produced it, and we sent it off to somebody. And I think they saw what we should have seen already. It wasn't really a terribly good idea. So we didn't really follow up with it after that. But again, we did actually make a small recording, home recording of it. And we still I still occasionally just go back and listen to it. And I thought,
Right.
what were we thinking of? You know,
Well,
but Dave was always like this. He'd come up with an idea. Why don't we do this? And no, that doesn't sound. Yeah, we could do it. And so I miss Dave a lot because he was a real live wire, you know. And right to the end, he went more into classical music towards the end of his life, and that was his real joy. He studied music. He taught music for a few years before his death as well. But again, I go back to the music side of things. He left a small legacy, you know, the people out there who still, my wife says, oh, Dave had a wonderful voice, didn't he? She said, Dave had a wonderful voice. She said, you write a lot of words to me. So what can I say? Yeah.
Underhanded comments.
Yes.
Well, how does it feel looking back, or even today, to be considered a cult band in folk rock circles?
Wouldn't I love to be that? Yes.
Well,
Cult, that normally means sort of somewhere in the world, somebody has stumbled across what you did all that time. I think what it comes down to, live long enough. I mean, if we live long enough, we probably eventually become legends as well. You know, it means nobody ever liked you at the time, or nobody took a lot. Nick Drake was a good example of that. You know, never had very little success in his lifetime. When he died, everyone came out of the woodwork and thought, oh, what a great artist, how influential he was. And but he couldn't take it either. He wasn't sort of geared up for that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the secret is live long enough, you know.
And it will all come to pass.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the legend bit, you know, or possibly the MBE or something, services to mankind, you know, just not too much, just something that's sort of,
right, either famous or infamous, right?
Yeah, either. I'd do either of those.
Either one of those.
Yeah, something on the pavement at Broadway, you know, somewhere something like that. That would suit me fine.
What? Okay, let's go back to your the painting. Did you what am I trying to say? When you were in school, did you major or did you focus on art? Was that a major subject for you?
Yes, I did. We have A levels over here, so I specialized in that for a couple of years. And English literature I did as well. So I think a lot of the wordiness of what I do came out of studying literature, really. So I love, I might not speak words very well, but I love words and the use of them. So I think that came from there. And obviously the art, I could draw a bit, so I didn't know what else I was going to do. So yeah, I'll give art a go, and little knowing that it would actually become the, if you like, the day job, the career job, which I did for, well, still do to a certain extent, but for about 40 or 50 years. So that sort of came from no plan. There's never been a plan for any of this. It's just sort of happened. And I started out doing surrealist fantasy works initially, which is still a real love. It's something I love doing. I had exhibited in London a few times. And again, I was getting the prestige of being in good galleries and so forth, but not enough to sustain me, you know, not enough financial recompense for it. So not because of that, but I was also doing Cotswold landscapes at the moment. Cotswold's a very beautiful part of England. I don't know whether you've ever been there, but
no, but from what I've seen pictures,
yeah,
and your art,
yeah, very picturesque. So I started doing paint. I tried a few paintings of that, and I just, again, this is when opportunity did come at the right time. I just went into a rather posh, do you know that word you use, posh over there? Mm-hmm. Upper strata gallery in Broadway, which is a very salubrious area. And I just plucked up courage in one day and went in there with a couple of sketches and things I'd done. And just the guy in there said, I'm actually looking for an artist to do, to become our Cotswold painter at the moment. I quite like what you're doing. I think I can sell these. So I sort of became a Cotswold artist, really, again, without thinking this is what I'm going to do. And I got quite proficient at it. So that's what really I did for probably 30 years.
You mentioned literature. I wanted to ask you earlier about literature and your music, but also with the art. Talk about what books or that you read that may have influenced your music and art.
Yeah. Well, in the early days, I mean, we did what youngish kids did in those. It was sort of Lord of the Ring and things of that nature. I did rather pretentiously read some existentialist books when I was 15. So I could be trendy, just, hey, I'm so cool, look what I'm reading, like that. Didn't really understand any of it, but I read these books thinking, it's a bit of prestige, look what I've got. It's like when you buy your first LP and you walk home with Pink Floyd under your arm, or the new Bob Dylan. It was that sort of era, when
you were a name dropper. You were a name dropper.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know where I was going with this. Have you any idea?
Let me see. Let me get into your head.
Yeah. Oh, literature. Yeah. So influences. So from that point of view, quite a cross section. And I obviously did Shakespeare and things like that at school. Amazing how those phrases have stayed. Even in the language now, how we slip things like heart on my sleeve and all those things come into pop songs and so forth. And then from the art point of view, I think the first time I got really stunned was when I saw the Salvador Dali painting for the first time and saw the images within images. And it was just like, wow, that just sort of pinned me back. I'd never seen anything like that before. So I was early on influenced by him with my fantasy sort of works. And then later on, English artists, Turner and Turner, artists of that ilk, those sort of guys who painted the English landscape.
Where does you're an artist, so where do you think someone comes out of the blue like Salvador Dali, something so new and vibrant that hasn't been done before? Where do people like that come from, and how do they start doing what they're doing? Revolutionary. Where does that come from? Is it just a brilliant mind?
I have no idea. I could speculate. I mean, Salvador Dali used to say, the only difference between me and a madman is that I'm not mad, which kind of reinforces the fact that he did kind of have that strand going through him, but he was also a great businessman as well. And I think I kind of went off in later years, it's something that you, in your adolescence, you think this is fabulous. But lately I've come back to him, and I think so much of some modern advertising, film, effects and so forth. He was doing all that stuff with paint all those years ago, and probably one of the first people to do it. So I'm almost going back there a little bit at the moment to reevaluate him. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He might have been mad. He also gave the astounding advice to one of his students once. Student asked him, how do I make a living? How do I get to be a great artist? And he said, first, make yourself extremely rich. So it's probably the same with music. First, make yourself extremely rich, and then you can totally indulge for the rest of your life, maybe. So he wasn't mad. No, he wasn't mad. He knew what he was doing.
Your watercolor paintings, the countryside, very pastoral, harkening back to a bygone.
I did just actually bring I finally wrote a little book a few years ago. It's like they're just trying to find something suitable to show you. As ever, it's got a little bit of my early art in it, but it's some of my early sort of pictures, but also, this probably isn't going to work at all. So I was doing a lot of these sort of idyllic country, possibly even then they were of a time a slightly earlier time, shall we say. People didn't,
A simpler time, yeah.
yeah. So that's,
Yes.
and you see that that's fairly typical, and that's Broadway, the place where I mostly exhibited the paintings as well.
Right.
And yeah, I still do an occasional one or two of those.
And that could be going back to your childhood too, right?
Yeah.
You said
So
it was
it felt very natural to do it.
right. And it's a good I don't know. It's a good thing to have in these times too. You know, is you know an image there of something that's very peaceful and you know makes people feel good and kind of an escape. Definitely an escape for our hectic lives. Yeah.
I like to think I'm not really into nostalgia as such, but I more and more now, I think, as with some of our music, you know, the innocence of perhaps another time, you know, when people could live in the country and rear sheep or pick fruit or whatever, live in that way, much simpler way. It's the multi-option with everything else. We have too many choices in pretty well everything we do. And then our minds get very cluttered with all this stuff, and the joy is taken away for so many people, you know, because you're having to deal with so many problems all the time, choices. Nothing is straight anymore. Can I just sort of, so I'm a little bit aware of the time now, just sort of few people I'd like to mention as well who in recent times helped me a little bit. Sorry, but I don't wish to jump in ahead of you if you have a question you were going to.
Well, there was a couple of three more questions I had, really, actually.
Okay.
Shadows in the Dust. When did that come out? When was that released?
Gosh, you have done some research, haven't you? Did it come out? No, it was like a little personal project I did. I can't. It was more. It wasn't actually. It was a few private pressings, a few friends, and that had copies and so forth. I don't think it had a proper release as such, and of course, it was a little bit before the internet became what it is now, so it didn't really get any exposure as such. But it still. Still some songs on there I'm you know very pleased with, and some of the people I work with again. So Mike Hooper and Andrea Blythe came in again, and I did it with my friend Rob Savage in his little studio. And then after that, I've been doing, well, each album I treat everyone as the last one now. So a few years ago, I did a little album with particularly, well, two friends of mine, Rob Powell, who's a very good keyboard player. We met one night playing in a little hotel not far from here. And although he's classically trained and also playing in rock bands and so forth, we used to strum away after the musicians had left the pub. They had, you know, guests there every week. And when they played, there were always guitars hung about. We'd strum together and found we got on really well. It became very similar to when I was working with Dave. We seemed to bounce off each other very well. So he helped me with a solo album, was the last one I did. And we also had a little group called Wirewood.
Right, I was going to ask you about
with was that another question? Yeah.
Yes.
And that involved Rob, and we found a cellist, Lorna Joy Davis, who lived right up on the Malvern Hills, and she had a little studio up there. So we recorded an album up there as Wirewood. We recorded 2 albums, in fact. And we started doing a few gigs and that. And we did that for about 2 years with moderate, you know, interest, success.
Did you enjoy that? Did you enjoy that work?
Yeah, yes, it was great. I was hoping it was going to continue. And Rob was, he got caught up. He was in another band and doing other musical projects. And Lorna was doing a lot of studying at the time. So things gradually eased off there, but I still had a whole batch of songs. I never stopped writing songs. So I had got to get these down somehow. So I got them involved and they came back and helped me a lot on the last album I did, which was this one, which I think you may have seen, which is again a little bit of surrealism on the front of it.
That's your
called
that's your artwork.
That's right. Yeah, that's the weirder stuff. And that was called Forget Your Password, Try Again, which kind of sums up how I feel about the modern world, really, and how we've got trapped by technology, basically. That song was, but there's so they very kindly helped me out with that, and I'm very pleased with it. But we also did 2 albums as Wirewood as well, and again, I'm just very pleased we've done them. And the people who do like it, but you've got to get a lot across. You've got to get across to a lot of people, or be out playing a lot to actually progress with that. So that's roughly where we are at the moment, and also doing another album currently. Again, Rob's been helping me a lot with that. Tim, whose studio this is, we were going to do some stuff later on, but he's got to shoot off tonight a bit later on. So so again, I'm treating this as the last album again, and it's just purely. My wife often asks me, why are you doing it? You don't go out and play very much. You're not pushing it online. And it's the old classic answer, because it's what I do. I love doing it. And it's like a paint palette, you can come in the studio and, it'd be nice to have some keyboards on that. It'd be nice to have some strings there. So it keeps me interested. I think if I was just coming in and just strumming my guitar and doing 20 straight acoustic tracks, singing, listening to my own voice, and that would drive me around a twist probably. But I love bringing in all these other influences and other people, and I always think I'm bound to forget to mention people. I also have a friend, John Nurse, who's also a singer-songwriter. So we have many conversations about the validity of what we're doing. Is it worth it? And why are we doing this? So that's a constant line of thought with us, but it always comes back to it's what we do and we love doing it. John's also played on this album and a bit of singing on it. So yeah, it's nice to keep it within your friends, people you get on with. I think if they were just musicians bought in for the session and so forth, not that I could afford to pay them anyway, but if they were bought in for the session, it wouldn't be quite the same.
Right.
So it's nice working with friends and people you respect, and people who are better. They can do things you can't do. I can do backing vocals and that, but Rob does a lot of them much better than I could. I have played a little bit of keyboards, but I'm not a keyboard player in any way. Rob is very, very good. So get him, and then with the ideas, let him. I'd say, well, I'd like a little bit here. I've got this vague idea of it being this, but you do what you want to do. And normally what he does is what I like. And it's the same with Tim. When we come to mix the songs, he tends to anticipate what it should be like. He can see it better than I can sometimes, that, why don't you do this, or leave that bit out? Or so it's that balance between being very focused, this is what I'm doing, and listening to other people and respecting that other people's ideas are very often better than your own. So that seems to be the way and it works very well. So as long as these old bones keep going, and this old voice keeps on, I'll be here doing this damn music thing. Possibly. Or this may be the last album, but we've almost finished now. We've got one track on there which Tim said he was having nightmares over. It's it's about 11.5 minutes long. It's in movements, or so it's almost like it's a song cycle, if you like. So it's several songs in one, and that has been a nightmare to put together and mix, but it's what I wanted to do, and it's probably going to be early on the album. I think, well, not many people are going to want to listen to this, but I've also got various friends playing on it and doing voices. My friend Karen's done some children's voices on it, and Rob's done a lot on it, and Terry, another friend of mine, has came and did some very earthy Green Man type vocals on it. So it's just lovely to have these other people involved. Another friend who's helped me out a lot with album sleeves and so forth. I mean, I've done the artwork for it, but he's really spent a lot of time and effort putting it together for me. And two other friends, I have to mention all these people, Chris and Diana, who've also, just in case they see this video, they may never, but if they do, why didn't you mention me? But they also helped me a lot. They put my website together and give me a lot of encouragement. So I'm very lucky that I've had people, and my wife tells me that, or asks me why I write so many words. So she's also encouraging as well. So.
Well, see, that's where it's going to be up to you to do a little bit of work. Pass the word around on your website, on all your social media. Tell everybody that you know, and their dog and their uncle and all their in-laws, and everybody pass the word around to visit and put comments. So far, I don't have any comments. Kind of disappointing, but I know people are visiting. I can see.
Yeah, but I've looked at, said, the stuff you've done, and I'm thinking it's going to build very nicely. It's just very interesting. If you like, well, I can't speak for the other people, but it's very nice to have, if you like, very ordinary people like myself, but also because everybody has a story to tell. I mean, fair enough, you might get Mick Jagger on one day, or no, they're doing too much on him at the moment. But you might get Bob Dylan one day on, but is it going to compare with what we've done tonight? No.
You mentioned earlier about, you've talked about being in your blood. You have to do it because it's who you are.
And let's face it, if we hadn't made that little album all those years ago, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. Somebody remembers that, and a few people, scattered people here and there. I know one or two people have said it was almost a seminal album for them. Not many, but you think, well, if that had multiplied up a few times, we might have all been, well, two of my friends are dead anyway, but I was going to say we would have all died much earlier on drugs and the consequences of the life that emerges from being a rock star or whatever. So it is as it is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
it is. But
I'm sure it's going to be the other way around. I think I might have to go now because, as I said, Tim, I think, needs to get away, and he's very kindly come out here on a Sunday. And
yes, he is. And I apologize for the mix-up earlier about the time difference, and I didn't tell you up front where I was. Let's do a Thursday.
Oh yeah, that was interesting. Yes, yeah. But yeah, hey, at least I can say, I've just been doing an interview for the States. I've been talking to this guy in Texas. And hey, it's cool, man. I can live off that for a little bit, And,
right. Well,
it's been a pleasure. I've just got the feeling we could have narrowed down. We could have probably talked all night, but has that happened yet? Have you gone on all night or carried on with these interviews?
No, the longest was 2 hours. That was the longest interview I've done so far.
Well, I've got a feeling I've talked twice as much today as I normally talk so I hope it hasn't been too overpowering anyway.
No.
And if any of my friends who I haven't mentioned tonight do happen to see this, apologies, my mind is... Can
you think of anyone else?
I'm not renowned for my memory, put it that way. So, but I think I've mentioned most of the things that were pertinent. Yeah.
All right.
So, and anything else?
No. Do pass the word around.
Indeed.
Let everybody say hi. Say hi to your wife. And I didn't ask you about children. About
I've got two stepchildren and a son, grandchildren now. So how you can't believe it, can you? A young guy like me having grandchildren. Yes, you can. Yeah. So they're a joy to be amongst, and it's going back to this innocence. You see that wide-eyed way of looking at everything when you're that age. So no, they're a delight. We see them from time to time. Yeah. Well, we see them most. We see them most weeks. Really, yeah.
You're young at heart. I can tell that. And just
some days. Some days I'm Methuselah. yeah, whatever they call him. That guy lived to be very old anyway. That's how I feel some days. But,
Methuselah, yeah.
but
All
anyway,
right.
we keep making the music. That's the main thing, and hopefully you keep playing it and
That's the
putting
thing.
stuff out there. And
And you never know who you're going to reach. You never know, so I appreciate it, Pete, and thank you for the time. And what's on the horizon for Pete Hodge?
Being a little bit longer, breathing. So yeah, remembering to breathe in. That's a good rule for life. Remember to breathe in.
Right.
The next thing is the current
Breathing.
album I'm working on, which is going to be called Piper's Grove. Finish that off and then see how the juices are flowing then, and probably carry on. But although I've said so many times, this is it. And you find while the energy is there and the desire to do it, that will keep going really.
All right.
And trying as much as we can in these difficult times to enjoy life, but it's not always that easy, is it?
No, it's really not. But,
yeah.
But your music helps, and it helps a lot of people. So.
Well, it'd be nice if it's to lots and lots and lots of people, but a lot of people is very good. So a few people would be great.
Yeah.
That's been a pleasure. So thank you very much for bothering to contact me, and also it's just nice to pay a little bit of tribute to people who've been very important in my life, really. So they will live on as well a little bit, hopefully. As will this interview, video, whatever we like to call it. I guess that's going to be there for a bit. So
hopefully it will.
And hopefully one of hundreds eventually, and
yes,
build into quite something.
Thank you, and thank you for your kind words too.
Thank you very much. I'll go and get my taxi driver.
All right.
I wish. Thank you. Bye-bye, Greg.
All right, bye-bye.